1 second. We are live.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Anais.
I'm Rami.
And I'm Maya.
This week we have been reading In the Act of Falling by Danielle Mclaughlin. If you haven't read it yet, pause the podcast, read the story via the link on the Literary Roadhouse website, and come back. This story opens with a small family scene. The unnamed main character is preparing to go to work. Her husband, Bill, used to work in banking and continues to have rich tastes. Their son, Finn, is off school, and his mother thinks he should return. Bill thinks it's too soon and continues to read his expensive book on art. We deduce that this family has some financial difficulties. We also deduce that the mother feels left out, excluded almost, from the Bill and Finn relationship, especially now that Finn has been excluded and Bill is home all day at work. She told her son about some ducks dying in a pond, and this, together with a visit from a preacher woman, has filled Finn's head with concerns about a forthcoming apocalypse. What transpires is a sometimes thoughtful, sometimes harrowing, always bleak picture of semi-rural life in Ireland after the financial crisis of 2008.
Wow, that was really good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
much better than my summaries.
Oh.
I like Gerald's that week.
I felt like I was reading it off a website or something.
Yeah, I just feel so good. So, top level, how'd everybody initially like the story?
I loved it.
I loved it too.
That was good.
Yeah, I really liked it. Loved it, maybe. I can't decide how much I liked it, but I definitely liked it. And I'm excited to discuss. And there was points in the story where I literally was like, no, don't, no.
Yeah,
like, really freaking out.
One of the things that I thought was interesting, I wonder if the New Yorker is going to start doing this more often. In the short story, they had the author reading it as well as an audio file. And did either of you guys listen to it?
No, I didn't.
I did.
The author has the most amazing voice. It added
Really?
so much to the story. I loved her voice.
Really, it's funny because as I listened to the recording of it, I kept thinking to myself, like, she doesn't have like a bad voice or anything, but I remember thinking, I feel like a professional voice actor, though, would have added something different to the tense part, especially. That was the part where I noticed. In the beginning, it seemed fine. And then later on, I was like, yeah, I found a new appreciation for like the professional audiobook readers, the ones that do like the Audible stuff. I was like, this is harder than it seems.
Yes, it is. What I liked about it was that her voice acting didn't get in the way of the story. It let the words just unfold in a very natural way that felt almost as if I was reading. And what was really fun was to listen to the audio version as I was reading the text. And it was so much fun. And I hope the New Yorker continues to do that and make that available to readers because it was really fun.
They did it with the start of the affair, and that was the first time I noticed it. But the start of the affair, I think that one was a bit more jarring because I think with this one, the author's voice and her slight accent was what I expected after reading the story. Start of the affair came out of nowhere. I was like, not the author voice that I was expecting.
That's kind of how I felt the first time I pulled up an interview with George Saunders. I'm like, that's what he looks like? Really? I wasn't picturing that.
No.
Okay, so let's dive in a little deeper. We've already mentioned her accent. We know that this is an Irish story. There's a long history of bleak Irish stories. I roll. So as far as the language, what did you like about it? Was there anything about the language that you guys didn't like?
Nope.
I love the musicality of the language.
I'll go.
Okay, Rami, tell us what's wrong with us.
No, nothing's wrong with you, and nothing's wrong with the author either.
You're just so polite.
You have to be respectful. It can't be like the Republican debate. So.
Ouch! No politics on the Roadhouse. Be nice.
Oh, I didn't. That was okay. All right. Sorry if I offended any of the Republican.
Our Republican listeners.
Yeah. The Republican listener, maybe if there's one.
We have a couple.
Oh, interesting. Anyway,
Really weird.
so the name of the child, Terry, threw me off.
He always picks like something that's just like.
Right, no, but this is an inside joke. It's not Terry, it's Finn. He just wanted to make this joke appear on the podcast because the name of the town that they grew up in is pronounced Port Leash, but isn't spelled like that. And then we had a joke saying, and then Finn is pronounced Terry. So, I mean, it was a joke.
No, I read the town's name as Portapus anyway. That's how I...
But the child's name is Finn.
No, exactly.
Oh,
No, because Finn, I kept reminding me of Huckleberry Finn, and also or Finny from A Separate Piece. And I know there's no copyright over character names, but I couldn't.
That's
help
funny
feel
because
that
those
the name was
names-
being expropriated, I guess.
That is so funny because, you know, when you think about some of like the great novels, you know, and they have a certain name, that's really funny that now whenever you read Finn, you think Huckleberry Finn.
That's really strange because I'm British and aware of Ireland and Irish things. It didn't occur to me that Finn was anything other than an Irish boy. It's kind of strange.
It didn't occur to me either, but it's been years since I read Huckleberry Finn. And I remember reading it vaguely. I know I'm just going to lose all my writer cred right now, but I don't remember it that well because I was really young, so it's just not in my forebrain. What I loved about the language was the language felt very musical, but also there was a lot of space. The story was written in a way that it never felt rushed. It didn't feel like a lot of our modern stories, even stuff that I'm writing right now. I find myself wanting to get in really fast and make lots of stuff happen and then get out before the ending, you know, the whole, you know, technique of writing BS. And I really love a story that just unfolds lightly and just lets me experience it in a more breathing fashion. And I felt like the story did that. I felt like the story just kind of unfolded in front of me rather than being something that, you know, I was constantly having to move forward and then there was this happening and then there was this happening. I love the language that way. Lots and lots of space for me to think and just enjoy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because the story, it wasn't that long compared to a lot of the New Yorker stories that we've read on this podcast. But it felt full. Like it just, I know exactly what you mean. Like it just sort of felt like longer than it was. And also, I've noticed when I've read other short stories for this podcast, I don't worry too much about time when things happened because they get convoluted. This one, in a very subtle but efficient way, handled time. I knew when it was morning. I knew when it was the evening, when this event happened in relation to that one. And it was a little like, I think 2/3 of the way through. And I was like, I've never paid this much attention to time when we read a story. This is the first time where I was like, that's very clear.
Yeah. And that's not easy to do.
No.
At all. And I'm looking forward to going back and just highlighting any place where time is mentioned to figure out how she did that. Because I have a story, I mean, this is even a problem in my novel that I'm writing, where time jumps all over the place because it's not really cemented. The novel takes place over just a couple months. There's a lot of things that happen over the course of a day. Especially the time when the main character's in mental hospital, time is all wonky. And this author was just, the use of time was beautiful in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I like since we're talking about that, I like the fact that the narrative and what happened in the story seemed to happen in a good sort of time scale. So in the story's world, it seems sort of perfectly logical that you know what happened at the start happened one day and it all seemed to flow really well, really competently. No, really well.
Yeah, we don't want to use that word with this story. That word is permanently on the. It's the C word. It's the other C word.
Oh, yes.
Gerald, I love you, Gerald. At the risk of sounding like Rami. The one thing that I was really relieved about was that the father did not, at least I don't think the father was having an affair with the religious woman.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
I was wondering.
That didn't even enter my head.
I totally entered my head.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
you wonder about that?
I do. I don't.
You think he was having an affair with that woman?
I don't know. I haven't decided, but there's enough clues where I think it's a little bit like,
See, I think she was showing up because she was seeing that this little boy was neglected, and she was, in essence, taking care of him while the dad was checked out. And then that got found out at the end. But right up until mom shows up at the park, I could have sworn dad was stooping the religious woman.
I mean, maybe he wasn't, but there was a part of me that wondered.
Didn't cross your mind?
What? That?
No.
Yeah.
He's just so sweet.
I was worried he was abducted by the homeless guy.
No, that didn't cross my mind.
Well, the child. You mean the child or the dad?
The child, obviously.
Oh, yeah, the child. But the child was abducted. Yeah.
Not obviously, because my brain was like, Dad's abducted? I'm confused.
No, the child. Yeah, I think there's a point where the author wants you to fear that the child is getting stabbed through the stomach like the dog. That whole scene, I was no. I mean, and it was the way she wrote it too. There was tiny things where I, in person, tensed up and like yelped. Like it was like I felt his hand on the small of my back. I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
Panic.
I was reading it and both times I've read it, I was sort of reading it, and when it came to that bit, it just no, and you sort of read faster through it. Oh no, don't let that happen.
Yeah.
And the fact that she got that reaction in us during such a slowly unfolding story, I think shows some of this author's brilliance. I'm going to go ahead and use the B word. Okay, that's my word. We've got our competently written on the other side. We got brilliance on this side. I do feel like that this particular story, there was a certain brilliance in the way it was written. Not only was there like moments where I felt such high tension, but there's something that I've been reading about in writing theory that I feel was used really well in this story, where you have moments of high tension are followed by moments of exhale. So it's almost like you're breathing through the story. And I feel like this story very much did that. I could feel myself take in breaths and then exhale, get tense and release, get tense and release throughout the story. And that was the best example of that particular concept that I've seen so far, where it was like, now I get it. Now I understand that concept. I see what she's doing. And I really appreciated it.
I think the part we just mentioned where she's sort of walking across the field and with the homeless guy, and you feel the tension increasing and the little touch, he's walking next to her and then he touches her and then the tension in the house was like, really melting point. And then she gets out and but you're still tense. And then when she sees Finn, then the tension is released but then it comes back again. She's so good at doing that.
And I think being able to fully master tension, to create tension, to release tension, when you're releasing tension, being able to release just the right amount of tension, I think that is the hallmark of a really good writer. I am so looking forward to reading more by this author. Like straight up, I love her writing. Now, one thing that was funny, and I've noticed this, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, because I know that Ireland has a long history of storytelling, oral storytelling, and I'm noticing a lot of my favorite authors are Irish, and I'm wondering if that is because the stories have some oral storytelling elements to them, like having a really tight use of tension. Like when you're doing oral storytelling, it's easier to manipulate and control tension to that extent. And I'm wondering if that cultural history of oral storytelling makes for that. I know there are other cultures that have really strong oral storytelling histories, and I noticed the same thing about their stories. A lot of like the African American masters of storytelling, like their books, same thing. They master tension that way. And I'm just like, I wonder if that is the hallmark of listening to a lot of stories when you're young.
It could be, yeah. It could be that children in Ireland are brought up on a storytelling tradition, and they've got a strong sort of folk aspect to their stories.
And Black culture has the same thing. We're very heavy on oral storytelling. You go to any family reunion and you're going to sit there and just listen to story after story after story. And, I when I read, when I read Beloved, because I had to reread it to do research for my novel, I could pick out the same thing, that pinpoint control of tension. And I'm just like, what is it that allows certain authors to do that and certain authors not to? And I'm just like grasping for straws because I don't know. What is that? I don't think it's something that can be taught.
No, but I don't know if I would blanket it as just an Irish culture thing. Because I remember one of the other sort of very Irish podcasts that we listened to was The Empty Family by Colm Toibin. And I remember that one didn't quite grip me as much. And I think it's that thing we've discovered since that podcast where that one kind of held like a flat emotional beat for me. This one definitely had me up and down. And this one also had me kind of like, how we were talking about, did he not have an affair? Did the kid get abducted or did he not? Is he down by the river? Is there something wrong with the kid? All of that, we're constantly looking at these clues and then trying to figure out the story behind the story that we tend to do. Wasn't as prominent in The Empty Family. There was a bit of that. There was a bit of like, remember in that story, he was writing a letter to his ex-wife and it's like, why did it end? That sort of thing. But the question,
I think that brings to mind what is tension, because for me, that story, while it was very flat emotionally, it definitely had very tightly wound tension. The tension was not messy. I don't know. Like you read some stories and there's lots of variations of tension, but you can tell the writer doesn't have control of it. I felt with the Toibin book, even though the emotional thread of the story left us kind of flat, I felt at no point did I feel like the writer was doing that on accident. I felt like the writer was doing that on purpose, and whether or not I liked it was up to me. But I never felt like the writer didn't have control of those elements.
I also liked in this story. I liked the fact that not everything was spelt out. So was the husband having an affair or not? And it's not spelled out. And so the reader has some work to do and to use their imagination and to fill in the blanks, which is a sign of an excellent short story.
It's also the sign of an author that's trusting their audience, I think. There's so many writers now that are afraid of getting the critique of I'm confused or I don't understand absolutely everything that's happening. And I've been in critique groups where that is a big no-no and you're supposed to just immediately go and fix it. And I'm thinking, you don't always have to understand everything about a story. At least I like those stories where I don't. I like to have some work, and I feel like she trusts the audience enough to allow us to have that work. But it's not for everybody. I think that's more of a hallmark of a literary writer. Because in genre,
especially
most genre readers don't want that. They want to see the story like a movie. Some questions are fine, but you don't want to leave the story confused because that is an unsatisfying ending.
Yeah. And I was going to say, even though this one, the ending wasn't neat, like it didn't answer all the questions you've had along the way. It wasn't an ending that was like, so did Bill get the job? Is Bill having an affair? It doesn't answer any of those questions of intrigue. But it didn't need to, because it was sort of playing on this motif, which I thought was interesting. The motif of falling. Lots of things are falling or supposed to fall or get caught. She falls when she's escaping the creepy man. There's the birds and I thought it was really interesting. Yeah, everything's falling. And I thought it was really interesting that her motif, normally a motif is one tangible thing, it's the moon over and over. This one was a verb in motion, which I thought was really cool because their whole life is falling. I thought that was really well done and different.
At the bottom of a fall, you're going to hit rock bottom eventually. You know where this marriage is going. You know where
and she ends the story on her back.
Yeah,
right. She's lying down.
I loved how that was used. I also loved the fact that the child is just such like an open and obvious extension of what's happening to his environment. He's like this little rod that's like sucking up the energy of the earth and of what's going on, and you can see it in his behavior, you can see it in the things he does. And I love that because children do that, but it was in this story, it was done in such a way that was really artistic, and it was almost like it was like he was the canary, you know what I mean? And you could see what was happening in the story reflected in the child. I also like how natural some of the weird things he was doing felt. Because she kept talking about how weird he was. Okay, maybe this is an age thing, but my children would have done that. I can remember my kids in the backyard poking at a dead bird because they were interested in what it was and how it got there. And, you know, and I didn't find that particularly weird. Maybe bringing it in the house was, and putting it on the kitchen table.
Putting it on a plate, yeah, that was a bit.
But, you know, he's going to do dissection.
Yeah, I wondered whether she was writing the child with Asperger's or something. It's a bit.
That's actually what I was going to say, because he sounded like he had Asperger's. That's interesting that she actually wrote him that way.
No, I don't know if she did, but I was wondering. Too.
Well, speaking of the fact that the things that she embeds in the story constantly create questions. So that was one question. Does the kid actually have something? And I think the answer that I ultimately came down on for myself, which doesn't mean it's the right answer because she doesn't give an answer. But the story, the thing that I came down for myself is he's already 9. If he had some more serious issues, you would have seen this much earlier. I think he is very recently acting out because of the problems that are happening in his family. Like, I think it's very much tied to what's going on around him, that if it hadn't happened, you wouldn't see this, you know?
That's interesting. I definitely questioned whether or not he had Asperger's, but where I came down on it was the idea that children are inherently psychic and they just pick up their environment. And that all of these things that he's doing just are a reflection and a symbol of what's happening in the environment. And whether or not he has something doesn't really matter in the story. And it's not really the point. But what is the point is that he is this perfect warped mirror of everything that's happening in this woman's world. And I thought that was beautifully done.
Yeah. And I think he was also really seduced by the apocalypse stories because his life must be feeling like an apocalypse. Like everything was great, and you know, he was spoiled. Well, like I don't know if he was spoiled, but just like he had access to everything, and his parents were wealthy, and then all of a sudden that gets taken away. It must seem like the end of times.
Well, I would consider myself to be one person in the camp of wanting a conclusive ending.
Yeah,
for me, I felt like it would have been more satisfying that way. I would have liked the story to keep going, but I know that it was intentional and it kind of fit with, I guess, the whole theme of
it. I love that you said you're in the camp who likes more conclusive endings. Somehow that doesn't come of us as a surprise, considering the stories you forced us to read lately.
That's true.
There's been a lot of competently written stories on the podcast lately.
I don't think we should take away from the word competent or brilliant. I think you should use them when you mean them. And that's how
I definitely do.
This story was brilliantly written.
Exactly. Because I think it's a beautiful word too.
Yeah.
So going to your point about wanting a conclusion, I will say that while I'm normally all about the inconclusive endings, this one, because she had set up so many threads of intrigue, there was a part of me that was like, I really want to know. And it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the story. It didn't make me like mark off points because I needed an answer. But I think it actually speaks to her sort of genius as a writer that she made me care so much. Because then going back to the comparison to The Empty Family, there were lines of intrigue that weren't answered and I didn't care as much as I cared in this one.
And at the end, I like that. That said, it frustrates the living daylights out of me. Some of my favorite books, I just sit for hours afterwards going, I wish there was another one because I want to know what happens. And then I kind of walk around feeling emotionally dejected because I don't know what happened. And I kind of feel like, this story had some of that. Some books that do that let me in. Like, I felt mourning. I mourned the end of that book because there's just so much that I wanted to know. But I like those stories. Then again, I like to be tortured, and I'm just a masochist. What can I say?
And I think the fact that it's the threads are left-handing means that as the reader, you're sort of looking into a portion of their family life, and you're just looking at a couple of days in what happens, and that's so it's. In a way, it's not a traditional story with a start and a middle and an end. It's sort of just the middle bit. But I did.
But isn't that what Vonnegut suggested? He says, you start the story during the action, you leave before the conclusion, you keep go, and for me personally, if this story wrapped up all the endings in nice neat bows, I feel like it would have taken something from that middle. It would have deflated it somehow. And I feel by leaving before everything was wrapped up, it left me still having some of that tension in my body. And, it added something to the story for me.
Plus, to support what Gerald just said, because I completely agree, also, it's called In the Act of Falling. So you don't get to the end. You don't get to find out what happens once you fall. Right. So I think if she said, and they divorced, or something like that, then that's no longer the act of falling. We're not supposed to know.
I think that's kind of obvious. I think it's obvious what's happening both by the actions of the story, but also by the motifs. There's so much.
And the title. She puts it right in the title.
Yes, it's right in the title. The action of the boy, everything that's happening, the way she looks at her husband, when he shows up at the park. We know they're going to get divorced. We know they're falling apart. We know the son's going to have problems in school, end up in therapy, have bad relationships, and eventually recover in his 30s. That's just how these things go, right?
And we know that the next door neighbor is going to get arrested sometime soon, possibly for killing a person. It's like, doesn't it just seem like the serial killer story? They start with small animals, and before you know it.
Which reminds me, I have a short story you need to read, Eddie's. It's very much in that vein.
Again, I thought that was handled well. Yes, it was violent and quite shocking what happened, but then she left that to one side, and I love that. So who knows what's happened with that person and whether it's going to happen with that person, but it's just one of the threads that's just left hanging. We had interaction with him, and then we've gone away, and whatever happens.
How did you feel about that, Remy? Since you love your nice, neat endings, and you like nice people and stories with moral compass.
Yeah, no, I already said, I felt like the inconclusive ending detracted from it, but I like how you tied in the title of the story, because I didn't really think of that. That it's supposed to be in the act, and we're not supposed to see how it ends because it just describes a portion of the act of falling.
See, we're going to convert him. By the end of the podcast, by the end of next year,
I understand.
He's going to be.
I understand.
With no morals.
Different from I agree. I can understand a person's point of view, but I don't have to agree with it.
It's okay. In a year, you're going to be reading stories with no endings and no moral compass and lots of adult sexual activity, and you'll just be like the rest of us.
I like it.
Was anyone else as frustrated with Bill as I was?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bill.
Come on, Bill.
He's the dude. He's the Big Lebowski.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my god.
Okay.
What are you doing?
I thought, and what we're saying about the title and the whole sort of premise of the story. One of the parts that I highlighted, one of the lovely sort of bits of writing, was talking about when they bought the house, and they said they bought in those last few weeks before the crash, when the market, like a ball in flight, had quietly, imperceptibly stopped rising, had hung for a millisecond at the peak of its trajectory before it began to drop. and again, it's the act of falling. It's it doesn't talk about the crash. It's just saying it's up there and it just starts to fall. And again, that's just tying it all in.
2 comments. I was actually in mortgage. I was a loan officer when that happened. And that is the best description of how it felt to be at that epicenter that I've ever read. I've read quite a few books about the crash. I've read stories about the crash, but there was just like a 3-day period right before like the free fall where it was almost like you could feel that something was wrong. Wasn't rising, wasn't going down. It just kind of hovered. The phones felt weird. You could tell your bosses were getting a little antsy. And then all of a sudden one morning, the FBI is at the loan officers down the street. You call the banks, they've got no money. It was the best description of that I've ever read. The other thing that I loved the description of was Bill's depression. Male depression after losing a job. That is something that's a very particular type of depression. I've been in its force field on 2 different occasions. It's very different from any other type of depression I've been around. And I feel like it was shown beautifully in this story. We were frustrated with Bill. You're frustrated with men when they go through this. You don't want to be frustrated with them because you understand and you're trying to be supportive, but weeks on end, they're literally doing nothing. And you can tell that this sense of identity, this over-identification with job, and then the job is gone, and that whole sense of identity just drops, and they're just so lost. And I feel like both how he was betrayed and her response to him was very honest and truthful in the story.
Yeah. And speaking of her response to him, when she's doing all those internal calculations, like, I need to be careful how I play this. I know that if I don't somehow make this work, then from now on in the future, it will always be that I got in the way of a potential job. And I'm like, I've done that. When I'm like tiptoeing around something with my partner, and I'm like, I know that if I don't do this now, even though I don't want to, this will be held against me for the rest of our lives.
Yes, I remember tiptoeing around the topic of whether or not my ex was going to quit working completely to go to school and take on a ton of student loans or work part-time. And I spent 3 days doing that kind of self-talk, trying to figure out the best way to present this because I don't want to pull the rug out from under, and I don't want him to not go, but I also don't want him to graduate with $100,000 in debt. And it's like, okay, so if I say this wrong, I'm always going to be unsupportive, didn't want to do it anyway. But if I don't say something, I'm watching a crash happen. And yeah, that was beautiful. This story, I feel like honest is a description that is coming up a lot for this particular story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the more we discuss it, the more my rating's like creeping up. Like
it is one of those.
Yeah.
Did you notice that when was the last time we had a story that didn't start with at least one of us having a super low rating? Like all of us at least liked it. And it's been a while. Usually at least one of us can't stand something, can't stand the story or can't stand the writing. And this story, I feel like everything started kind of like in the middle at least.
Mm-hmm.
Rami?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, I think was kind of like that too.
Yeah, but that's Langston Hughes.
This is the first longer story. Where
it's also, it's the first longer one. It's by an author that is contemporary, and we all came into it, at least liking it. I feel like this is probably one of the better stories and more universal. So I'm going to ask you a question. We've read a lot of stories that were very well written, but it seems like their readership is very specific. So maybe it's quote unquote competently written, but some of us love it, some of us hate it. And that's how the conversation goes. What do you think it is about this story that makes it so easy for all of us to like, even though we're all so different?
It's relatable in the sense that it talks about some universal struggles that people go through in relationships. You said you were frustrated with the actions of Bill, but for me, maybe because I identify in a different way with like transitioning through, between jobs and stuff, it's I feel like people need I was like, okay, he's taking his time to recalibrate, to really assess like his next move and stuff like that. I didn't, of course, condone just like the carelessness as it relates to the child, but just like taking your time and not rushing into the next opportunity that presents itself and stuff. But
so you thought he was just taking his time? You didn't think he was depressed?
No, I mean, there could have been depression in there, but I don't think that his inaction might have been solely because of depression. I feel like maybe he just needed the time to time off is needed. Like, I don't know. And now we're just like throwing in our own interpretations of what's happening because it like
but
left
that's
so many.
What we do.
Yeah.
I will say that even though I was frustrated with Bill, it's not like I didn't have any sympathy for him. And there was one part where I was kind of like really sympathetic, was when she was saying she knows the reason that Bill doesn't want to take Finn to school is because he's going to have to take the bus instead of driving the kids to school. Like all the other parents has to take the bus and drop him off and bus back out. I was like, I can see how that would wound your pride when you used to be a financial consultant and worked in the banking industry. Like I definitely got that and felt bad.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, I think the fact he'd had business cards printed with financial consultant, but he had no clients, and the whole thing is just, and there's a beautiful bit where she describes his shirt that from his banking days, an expensive shirt.
Oh,
crumpled
that was heartbreaking.
Broke my heart. The description of his shirt from his banking days that's wrinkled, and I was just like, oh, stab right there.
Especially because if you remember, that's happening in the morning. So he's still waking up and putting his wrinkled banking shirt that he slept in with the pajama bottoms. I was like, ugh.
Well, this is interesting too, because I didn't tie him being a financial consultant to a lucrative banking career like you have been alluding. Because for me, a financial consultant, I thought might have been like a personal financial consultant, which really is sort of like, people who sell the life insurance or like work with people independently and not necessarily employed by larger institutions. So I thought that there's
different levels of being a financial consultant. I mean, yes, there are salespeople that call themselves financial consultants, but if you go and you do, what is it, the CFA type test, and you're studying for years and you come out of that, even if you are a personal consultant, you're still making a ton of money.
Yeah, but I think the clue is in the story that he made a lot of money because the house they bought is big. It used to have a whole estate. It was owned by people who kept bees, and it looked like what's a pony trap? It's basically a one-horse carriage, an open one-horse carriage. Like this is a fancy house that they bought. So I think that's clue enough that whatever he did exactly was lucrative.
And the only point at which she mentions financial consultant is when she refers to his business card. So he was working in banking. So I think it's safe to assume that he had nice shirts and he bought expensive books and magazines and things. So,
but what Rami just said and what you guys said bring to mind another point, because financial consultant means different things in different countries, different areas. My idea of a financial consultant, because I have worked in mortgage, is very different than what the general consensus. So when I think financial consultant, I don't think insurance salesperson. I think a personal consultant that helps you figure out what to invest in. So it's like a personal broker type thing. That's what I think of. And those guys make a ton of money. And so that's where my head goes. But because it is such, that phrase can mean so many different things, she supports it with description of the house, description of the shirt. You know that they had money, even if you don't necessarily understand what that job entails, because of the surrounding elements of the story.
And also the impracticality of what seduced them into buying the house. Remember when she's like, we had the the insulation wrap on the windows, the original sash windows, which are drafty. I feel like practical modern people who don't have that much money, they don't do that. You buy the new insulated windows, but I feel like if you have a lot of money to spend, you could be like, oh yes, the originals. And she talks about how the real estate agent is salivating over it, and that got a chuckle out of me.
Yeah, it felt very modern, especially considering where I live. I live in an area where a lot of people make impractical choices for art reasons, or they decide to buy a vineyard for fun. Yeah, and because they want to be winemakers, and then they realize winemaking doesn't make any money. So yeah, it definitely got a chuckle out of me. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where do we want to go from here? Are we ready to rate, or do you guys have anything else you want to talk about in this story? We've all said a lot of really amazing things about this story. Do you have any comments?
I also thought it was funny. There was some parts where I really literally laughed out loud. And
yeah, I always talk about the emotional beats in the story. This one had me laughing. This one had me gasping. It had me feeling, bleak. I was up and down throughout the whole thing, and it kept hitting on a lot of truths. So, yeah.
That seems right in your wheelhouse. You love stories that hit a lot of different emotional beats. You like to be all over.
Like the roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think also because it is very contemporary, and we all know about the crash, and we all saw it, so we can relate to the overall story pretty well, I think. So we've got an attachment to it straight away.
I think in addition to what you said about, it's being contemporary and we all can recognize, because we all lived through it. At the same time, it didn't feel like it was so cemented in one particular time period that it was going to date itself. It felt very fresh. It felt contemporary. It felt like something that could happen in the future and in the past. And that was something I really appreciated about this story. So what are we going to rate this puppy?
Shall I go first?
On a scale of
1 to 6.
First. Who's going to go first?
5.5. 5.5 for me. Yeah. The only reason I can't give it a 6 is because Saunders exists. Did I love this as much as Saunders? Kenichi Prophecy is true. So 5.5.
We need a little sign that you can hold up. Kenichi Prophecy.
Yeah, whenever I'm rating weird,
so
because
only our super fans will get it, but
it's an inside joke for the super fans who've been listening from the beginning.
Yes.
Kenichi Prophecy.
So Remy, what do you think? What are you going to rate this puppy?
5. 5.
I'm curious, Annie, because you said that your rating went up. Was it originally a 5.5, or did it go up from something?
It was originally a 5, and then I'm like, no, I liked it more than a 5.5.
It went up a half point. And Gerald, how do you rate this story?
6.
You give it a straight 6. Woohoo!
Loved it from beginning to end.
Well, since we only give increments of half points, I'm going to give it a 5.5. But honestly, I want to give it a 5 3/4. I love this story. The only reason why I'm not giving it a 6 is I didn't feel the sky open up and the angels sing and the rug get pulled out from under my life. But honestly, this story was amazing. This is one of the few stories, we read a lot of stories where we're like, I would recommend it to some people, but not other people. This story, I would literally recommend it to anybody. There's something very universal about the story. I think almost anybody could read it and get something out of it.
That's interesting. I would recommend it to quite a few people, but not everybody, because something about the inconclusive ending and the fact that it is slowly paced, I think there's like a type of reader, like I guess someone who read lots of pulp stuff, who I can't see getting into this.
I don't think it felt slow, even though it slowly paced. It had enough going on. I think even somebody that reads a lot of genre fiction and expects a lot going on could still read this story and not get frustrated with it. Whereas a lot of stories that slowly unfold, I think that particular kind of reader would be like, nothing's happening, and throw it across the room. You know what I mean?
If you get to the neighbor, you're hooked. If you get to the part where the neighbor's creeping, you're going to finish it, but you have to get there.
And then I'm just a cruel recommender. I'm like, if I bang you over the head enough with unconclusive endings, eventually you'll like them. So I am giving this a 5.5.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So it's time to choose next week's story. And I'm hosting the game. So what do we want to read next week, Maya?
I am putting into the hat a translated short story that I've recommended before. I really want to read this. In Search of a Man for Friendship and Possibly More by Empire Molinar. It is on the World Literature website. They've got a link to some translated stories, and I want to read that.
Okay. Anise?
I am putting it again. I've been putting it for weeks now. Drinking Coffee Elsewhere by ZZ Packer.
I haven't read any Packer.
We need to read Packer. I'm trying to get it in this month for a reason. But
good luck with that.
And Rami?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. First, let me tell you the struggle I went through to try to find a story. No, really, because
that wasn't a parable, right?
The thing is, I think I'm out of my parable mode, but because I nominated the story maybe like 2 months ago or something, and I just stuck with it. And the previous one, 3 questions.
Yeah.
So because I've been nominating the same one for so long, I haven't had to look for another story, and it was really challenging because I told you I must have read like 2 or 3 stories in full and decided not to submit it because I just wasn't satisfied.
This is why you don't read the stories before you submit them.
No, I feel like it's my responsibility to at least the listeners or whoever, if we're gonna use a story, for me to have at least vetted it and made sure it's something that I'm comfortable recommending.
Anyway,
and I emailed people to ask them, and some of them haven't replied. And
so what's
I had
the story?
to go back to my high school days. Shout out to
my goodness
teachers.
Is that why you asked me for a high school teacher's email?
No, he's not.
He's just
not
randomly asking me.
He's not the person.
Oh, okay.
You're killing me, Rami.
Go ahead.
And it's Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Whew.
Okay.
You know what would have been really funny if when he finally told us the name of the story, it had been a story we'd already done.
No, and okay. I originally wanted to do the one by Juno Diaz, The Cheater's Guide to Love, and I was like, I found the one. And then lo and behold, it's on the list. So I had to go back to square one. And
poor Rami. The torture of being on the podcast. So what's the game this week?
Okay. Well, it was going to be about Ireland, but then I thought that was a bit unfair for you non-local people. So,
but I think all of us have equal knowledge.
It's unfair. We all would fail.
Yeah.
True, but you've got to get some questions right. So this week's, and it's a pretty short quiz. It's about art. Don't be frightened. Everything's okay. So
about what?
I'm just gonna about art.
It's a what? It's about farts.
Art.
Parks.
Art.
Parks.
It's about parts.
No, it's about art.
Parks.
Art. A-R-T. Art.
Oh, art.
Art. Yes, art.
Parks. Okay, Gerald. Play this game about art.
I think I should win because I'm the only one who understood.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'll just automatically give it to you, Rami.
They let them answer their questions about farts and parks.
Okay. So the first round is free. Quick fire round. No. I want you to give me the artist who created these works of art.
Oh.
So start.
Is it multiple choice?
A collective groan.
The first round isn't. So that's just a bit of a test for you. So Maya, this is how easy it is. Who created Mona Lisa?
Van Gogh.
Wrong. It was Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh yeah, I know.
Oh come on,
Wow,
let people steal it at least.
I know, you should have let me steal.
You know what? No stealing. That's just wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Anais, who created the Scream?
Edward.
Scissorhands.
Full name? The Edward guy. I'm forgetting his last name. or his first name.
No half
Yeah.
a point. Well, maybe it'll give you half a point.
There's
Half
no
a point?
It's
Yeah.
all or nothing.
You gave her half a point.
Remy, I
That's
got
wrong.
half a point.
Do I get half a point?
I got
for
half a
being
point.
At least in the right century.
Munch.
Yeah. Anyway,
Munch.
very good. After I've told you, but never mind.
Oh, I didn't hear you.
Anyway, Rami.
Okay, well,
Why
but still
don't
have
you
a
grant me
point.
something easy?
No,
Rami.
by the time he gets to me, it's the hard one that's left.
No,
Go.
it's three simple ones. Rami, who created the Starry Night?
Oh, that one's Van Gogh.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Van Gogh.
Very good. See, that did it. Round 2 is multiple choice. Maya,
Thank God.
Maya, who created The Birth of Venus? Was it Botticelli, Monet, or Matisse?
A.
Botticelli is correct.
Woohoo!
Anise, water lilies. Was it Picasso, Monet, or Dali?
Monet.
Correct. Rami, woman with a hat. Was it Matisse? Was it Renoir, or was it Chagall?
Matisse.
Matisse is correct.
Oh, wow, what?
And the final round.
Yeah.
The final round, and we have got a tiebreaker if we need it. Maya, the creation of Adam. Was it Picasso, Chagall, or Michelangelo?
Michelangelo.
Is correct. Anais, the kiss. Was it Klimt, Picasso?
I didn't hear you. Someone coughed. What is it?
Was it the kiss? Oh, sorry. Was it the piece of art is the kiss? And was it Klimt, Picasso, or Monet?
Klimt.
Is correct. And finally, Rami, the persistence of memory. Was it Van Gogh, Dali, or Monet?
Dali.
Is correct. So no for. Well, we'll do the tiebreaker anyway, just for fun, because it's fun. The population of the Republic of Ireland. Maya, what do you think?
What does that have to do with art?
It's a tiebreaker. Go on.
It should still be
Okay.
art related.
I'm picturing Ireland, and I know that a lot of people have moved in lately.
I just thought that was the name of a work of art.
I'm gonna say 12 million.
A lot of people moved in lately. I like that.
Okay.
It's like
Well, a
your
lot of people
grandma's
immigrated to
house.
Ireland.
Anais, how many do you think?
Is this Price is Right rules closest without going over?
No.
No, you could go over.
That's closest. Yeah.
I don't know. 9 million? No, it's bigger. I'm thinking Costa Rica sizes.
But there's a lot of open space.
I don't
That's the hard thing.
There is. Fine, I'm going to stay with 9. I'm going to stay with 9.
Remy?
Ireland, huh?
Yeah. Just the southern part.
Are we counting expats? Is Conor McGregor part
Hey,
of
people are people. If they're there, they count.
How many live there?
Come on.
Ireland? Let's go with 15.
Wow.
15 people. No, 15 million.
15 million.
15
Let's just give him
people.
the million because
You're all
we know what he meant.
way over. It's 4.58 million. Is the
It's
So
that
close.
tiny. Wow.
Yeah, but you don't win.
That's the size of Costa Rica.
Yeah, that's.
It's for about
really
4.5.
cool. I figured it was bigger than that.
There you go.
Mm.
Lot of empty space. So
Okay.
anyway,
So do I win?
no, that was just for fun.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was just for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
But I thought he was beating me by half a point. So I just
But that was a
But
tiebreaker.
you were
You
still
weren't
half
tied.
a point.
Oh. There was
He's
no
beating
tie.
you by,
Okay.
therefore he beat you by half a point.
No,
Okay.
all of
So
them.
what are
with
we
the
rating
exception
this
of
week?
the first one, all of them were guesses. So I'm really surprised. I actually
I
didn't
knew
want to
mine.
win.
No,
I
Anyway.
didn't want to win.
I knew them too, but anyway, it wasn't my
The
good.
the Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
Hey.
Okay. Great. So hopefully we even make it to next week, because if Finn from this week's story is correct, the end times are falling upon us soon. So don't shed your mortal coil without first leaving a comment at literaryroadhouse.com and checking out our other podcasts, the Literary Roadhouse Book Club and the Bradbury Challenge. Leaving reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker will ensure that those who inherit the earth will be able to listen to our suite of literary podcasts. Until next time, read a good story.
Yay.
We made it!
Oh, we had
Yeah.